Today's theme in our Sermon on the Mount series is how to be reconciled. We human beings seem to have an innate capacity to fall out with one another. Ever since Cain and Abel fell out over the right way to worship God, we fall out and we find it difficult to be reconciled, but we rarely resort to murder. So it's easy to hear the commandment, "You shall not murder," and think that it doesn't apply to us. Doesn't matter. We're not tempted in that way. And it's easy to agree that everyone who does murder should be subject to judgment, the just penalty of the law. Once again, Jesus insists that we think again. Ruth Graham, wife of the well-known evangelist Billy Graham, was once asked, "Have you ever thought about divorce?" And she said, "No, never. Murder often, divorce never." And years ago, the actor Frederick Lonsdale was a member of London's Garrick Club, and he was engaged in a bitter and long-running feud with another club member with whom he had once been a close friend. And one New Year's Eve, a mutual friend of both insisted that Lonsdale reconcile with his old friend. "You must," he said. "It's very unkind to be unfriendly at such a time. Go over now and wish him a happy new year." Lonsdale eventually agreed. So he crossed the room to his friend-turned-enemy and said, "I wish you a happy new year, but only the one." It's so hard to overcome anger. But is it necessary? Everyone gets angry. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder, and everyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment." But I tell you, says Jesus. Jesus speaks with a new authority, an emphatic authority. There is a double emphasis here in the Greek of the New Testament. I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. He backs it up with a parallel saying. Again, anyone who says to his brother, "Raca," is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Raca is a term meaning something like blockhead or idiot. It's a term of contempt, questioning somebody's intelligence, which of course is a matter of opinion. What's worse, we might think, as it's a matter of the dangers of the fires of hell, about calling someone a fool? Well, Raca shows contempt for a man's head. Calling someone a fool shows contempt for his heart. Ultimately, a fool is a person who does not choose to follow God. And who knows, other than God alone, what is the state of a person's heart? Anger makes us say and do things that we may regret. It breaks relationships. It splits apart families. It eats us up through bitterness. How then can we be reconciled? And the first thing I want to say as we think about anger is that you need to recognize your anger for what it is. Different people deal with anger in different ways, and perhaps we all deal with anger differently at different times in different situations as well. So you can suppress anger, but that doesn't mean that it goes away. You can spiritualize anger. My anger is righteous and yours is not, we might be saying in our minds at least. You can be proud of your anger. This is the way God made me, and I can't help it. If you push me too far, I'll explode. Or you can surrender your anger to God. There is, of course, such a thing as righteous anger. Think of Jesus in the temple turning over the tables of the money changers. But this is not what Jesus is talking about here. He's saying anyone who is angry with his brother, without cause, it says in some earlier translations of the New Testament, will be subject to judgment. At the temple, Jesus was angry with cause. But is your so-called cause really just? Paul said, in your anger, do not sin. He didn't say don't get angry, but don't let your anger cause you to sin. Don't get angry for the wrong causes. Recognize your anger for what it is and realize that forgiveness and reconciliation start in the heart. Two brothers shared adjoining farms. For over 40 years, they worked side by side, sharing equipment, helping each other out whenever it was needed. But then one day, a rift developed between them. It began with a small misunderstanding. It grew into a major difference, and finally it exploded into an exchange of bitter words, followed by months of angry silence. One day, the elder brother Pete was out in his fields when a truck pulled up. Out jumped a man who approached Pete carrying a carpenter's toolbox. I'm looking for a few days' work, he said. Perhaps you would have a few small jobs I could do for you. Well, yes, I do, said Pete. See that stream down there? It's the border between my brother's farm and mine. My brother keeps it nice and deep to stop me setting one foot on his beloved farm. Well, I'll oblige him. I want you to take that timber over there by the barn and build me a new fence, a real tall one, so that I won't have to look over at my stinking brother and his farm anymore. The carpenter was glad to have the work. Consider it done, he said. He got to work. Meanwhile, Farmer Pete drove into town to the local cattle auction. But when he returned at sunset, he was shocked to see what the carpenter had done. There was no fence. Instead, the carpenter had built a bridge, and walking across it was Pete's younger brother, John. John held out his hand and spoke to his brother. Mate, after all I've done to you these past few months, I can't believe that you'd still reach out to me. You're right. It's time to bury the hatchet. The two brothers met at the middle of the bridge and embraced. They turned to see the carpenter hoist his toolbox on his shoulder. No, wait, stay a few days. I've got a lot of other projects for you, said Farmer Pete. I'd love to stay on, the carpenter said, but I have more bridges to build. So that's the second thing that I want to say to you as we think about how to be reconciled. Build bridges, not fences. Jesus says in our reading, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled, then come and offer your gift. There is a similar principle at work in the sharing of the peace that sometimes we might observe during our communion service. That sense of going to be reconciled with the individual with whom you share the peace before then coming to take the bread and wine of communion that remind us of how God has reconciled us to himself. Jesus came to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Colossians chapter 1, verse 20. And it's by him that we can worship God and have a relationship with him. A broken relationship with someone else causes a strain on our relationship with God. Reconciliation, or the attempt at reconciliation at least, shows the reality of our relationship with God. So build bridges, not fences. Jesus came to be a bridge between us and God, over which we can cross from death to life. John chapter 5, verse 24. He came to break down the barrier between Jew and Gentile, Christian and Muslim, black and white, male and female, one person and another, to reconcile through his body put to death on the cross. Build bridges over which you or your brother or sister may one day walk. Have you fallen out with someone and are still fallen out with them? Somebody has to make the first move. Make contact, phone, send a letter. If that fails, keep trying. Send birthday cards, even presents. If no response, well, keep loving them anyway. Don't make your love for them dependent upon them coming around to your way of thinking. That's offence. Instead, build bridges over which one of you may cross. Build bridges even to your enemy. Forgive your enemy and let your enemy forgive you. You can see reference to that in verses 25 and 26 of Matthew chapter 5. And there are also echoes of Peter in Matthew 18, the parable of the unforgiving servant, where Peter asks Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother if he sins against me? As many as 7 times. Peter thought he was being very magnanimous there. And Jesus said, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. Keep on forgiving. You see, forgiveness given and received gets us out of prison. It takes us out of the prison of anger, the prison of bitterness, the prison of hatred, the prison of pride, the prison of selfishness. It may even bring us the reconciliation for which we long. So, build bridges, not fences. And then the third main thing that I want to say is that you need to leave the past behind and look to God's future. Came across a story which dates from the days of the American Civil War when Robert Lee, a general of the Confederate forces, visited a woman in Kentucky who took him to the remains of a great old tree in front of her house. And she bitterly cried that its limbs and trunk had been destroyed by Federal artillery fire. She looked for sympathy from General Lee, who said to her, "Cut it down, my dear woman, and forget it." Well, we may not forget the past, and in many ways, nor should we. But it is better to forgive past wrongs than let them remain. And let bitterness take root and poison the rest of our lives. The cure for revenge and resentment is forgiveness. And forgiveness for the Christian is not an option. It is a command. We are commanded to forgive. In Colossians 3, verses 13 and 14, the Apostle Paul says, "Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." And so Jesus is our model for forgiveness. Get in your mind Jesus hanging on the cross. Jesus didn't deserve to hang on the cross. He lived a perfect life. He helped people. He healed people all of his life. He loved the least and the lost. And in return for all his love and good deeds, he was spat upon, ridiculed, whipped, and crucified. And yet, as he hung upon the cross in suffering, in pain, in agony, Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." one of the greatest gifts we can give to Jesus is to do as he has done for us, to forgive and to be reconciled.